of questions of my own. So you know the Surrey Board of Trade, we're a business organization. There's a Chamber of Commerce Board of Trade in every city all over the world. Surrey specifically is a border city, and we have the most number of manufacturers in British Columbia right here in Surrey. So the U.S. is a considerable trading partner for us. So I've been asking this question at all of the town halls is if you become Prime Minister, how would you deal with the President of the United States?
Very carefully. It's like, well, I felt, honestly, I think Justin Trudeau, I mean, I have many criticisms, but I think as Canadians, we have to hang together when we're dealing with our largest trading partner, a very important strategic partner in foreign affairs. No matter what we may think of the individual who occupies the White House, I think we have to hang together as Canadians and try to be unified in dealing directly with the United States. Now, in the case of how Trudeau has handled Trump as an individual, I don't know if anyone could have done a better job. Honestly, you're looking at a situation that's almost impossible. I always feel that whenever Justin Trudeau, or anyone for that matter, walks into a room with Donald Trump, it's like walking into a room with a hand grenade with a loose pin. And your goal is to get out again without anything going off and hurting anyone. So I thought it was clever to try to recruit Ivanka to the cause of Canada. I think the Canada-US Mexico trade agreement, the so-called USMCA now, NAFTA 2.0, I actually hope we can ratify it. It includes some substantial improvements for Canada in that it got rid of Chapter 11 of NAFTA that allowed US companies to directly sue our government if they didn't like our policies. It also got rid of the energy proportionality clause. Downsides, of course, around pharmaceuticals and chipping away at supply management for dairy. Not great, but on balance, Chrystia Freeland is another person for whom I have a lot of respect. She's done an amazing job in dealing with the United States. But we also have to recognize that International Peace Bridge, you're so close to the border. I think we need to be much more overt about the benefits for our exports and the benefits for tourism by advertising I'd love to see ads in US newspapers saying, Canada, now 25% off. Yeah, buy our goods, take your vacation here, everything, 25% off. It may take them a while to recognize that's just our currency. But we could say, it's a deal to our friends in the United States, 25% off to people from the United States. Come here on vacation, buy our goods.
There's an absolute opportunity to enhance our brand globally as a nation as well. I think that's an opportunity for the Canadian government. The other economic impediment that small businesses are having, and 98% of Canadian businesses are small businesses. We drive the economy, but skill shortage is the economic impediment. We're engaging in a Surrey labor market study, not been done before, to address those skill gaps, tying industry needs with the curriculum development in the education sector. But for your party, how important is addressing skill shortage?
It's huge. As a member of Parliament, I hear far more often from employers who can't find workers than I hear from workers who can't find jobs. So while the rhetoric for most parties is jobs, 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 I mean, well, wait a minute. We could, some of the job increases that the current government boasts about are firms that are working with temporary foreign workers because they couldn't find Canadians to do the job. So the boast of job increases, but it's from temporary foreign workers. I'm not against temporary foreign workers, but I think the program needs to be designed to encourage people to come to Canada with families and stay. Because we also have a demographic shift that's happening right now. I'm at the tail end of baby boomers. I'm a 1954 baby, so we're aging. I'm not retiring, by the way, but anyway, a lot of us are retiring, and the jobs are, there will be very soon more seniors than young people. So to have enough people to do the work that needs doing is a much larger problem than where do we find the jobs for the people. We need to find the people for the jobs, and they have to have the right skills, and you have to be able to match those skills. So we need to have a job bank where we actually inventory and profile where the jobs are, where the skilled jobs are, and make sure that Canadians in one part of the country have the mobility to get to where the jobs are. But we also have to have a policy that encourages immigration and encourages immigrants with the skills we need. One of the great tragedies is that you get points when you're coming in on immigration. You'll get points for the fact you're a professional and have a degree and whatever. They get here and only then discover that the points on the immigration form don't translate to the ability to work in the field in which you're trained. So we need to work with professional societies, engineers, medical societies, and so on. So the barriers to new Canadians taking up those skilled jobs are reduced. I mean, I hear from a lot of people in the field of some very, very specified fields, very specific skill sets, such as in the design of video games. And Canada has a huge sector of our economy and growing around video games and designers. And so, but to get the people that you need, you could have one or two skilled people that you need for a project, and you'll be employing hundreds more for that project. But if you can't get those skilled people into Canada because of glitches around the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, your whole project is sidelined. So we are going to, a substantial part of our platform is dealing with this, and also with the challenge, which is another big question in our question of workplace and employment and what it looks like, is what's going to be the impact of artificial intelligence? Are we really going to have robots replacing? How many jobs are replaceable? What are our plans? And I think we have to plan for a 4-day work week. We have to start planning for what happens when we actually have fewer people and more automation at the same time that we have this other big pulse to our workplace environment, which is going to be the demographic shift to older Canadians. So we're excited about our proposals for this. We have an incredibly brilliant young woman who's just almost got her PhD in astrophysics, who's running in Burnaby, North Seymour. Her name is Amita Kuttner, and she's my shadow cabinet critic on artificial intelligence, mostly because you just find she dives deep, and given that she's a PhD in astrophysics, she's no dummy. So I rely on Amita a lot, because we're debating these issues right now in terms of how can our platform anticipate what the future is going to look like, because it looks to me like the rest of the parties are planning for 2030, 2040 by looking in the rearview mirror. And that's not going to get us to answer the questions of what happens when we're older, what happens with AI, and what do we do now for acute skill shortages, acute employee shortages for companies that otherwise would grow.
Any questions from the audience? I think one of the main things, as Ramona is coming to the podium, that we're looking for from the small business community, in addition to our Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Ottawa, just to make it easier for people to do business in Canada, is reducing red tape. We want a comprehensive review of our tax code. Does your party have a perspective on that?
Root and branch review of our tax code. It has become far too complicated. It's far too, it's burdened by the accretion of political decision-making over a very long period of time for boutique tax cuts, for things that apply here and not there. So root and branch tax reform to make it make sense, to be easier to function. And I'll also make this observation: small business is overburdened with regulations, while multinationals have less. So the smaller the business, the more local your operations, the more you have trouble because of a bureaucracy that surrounds you. So I'll give you a very obvious example is if you happen to have a leaking underground storage tank that once there was gasoline on your property, any property owner who suddenly finds this is going to be stuck with as much as $80,000 in direct cost to that individual, that business, for cleaning it up. But if you're the oil sands and you're prepared to leave billions of dollars of liabilities and walk away, they'll walk away. So the more localized the environmental damages, the more extreme the response, and the less help there is from government. And so we need to look at the regulatory burden for food production. It's craziness. Local food production needs to be able to reach local people. We need to rethink the regulatory burden, because some parts of our economy are underregulated, and just say we're not gonna do it, so, and you know, and the government doesn't pursue them. One quick example from the Canadian Revenue Agency, and I'll stop and go to Ramona's question. The last report from our Auditor General, who just passed away, Michael Ferguson, provided in detail how CRA deals with people who are not paying their fair share of taxes. The only entities that had CRA officials voluntarily offer, we won't charge you interest on what you owe us, were large multinationals with offshore accounts. CRA would go out of their way to say, you don't have to pay the interest. CRA would also give them extensions. This is all detailed in the Auditor General's report. The differential obsequience towards the large offshore accounts that are holding on to billions that belong in the general revenues of Canada versus what they do with normal Canadians. Like, I can't believe it, my daughter, who's a university student, was audited this year. And one of her friends was too, to provide receipts for all her textbooks. Do they think she's holding out on taxes? This is insane. But our resources as taxpayers should go towards going after the named people in the Panama Papers. We're the only country that hasn't yet gone after the tax cheats that are listed in the Panama Papers. We like to let the big fish go free. I don't speak of actual fish because we actually wipe out all the big fish, but we like to let the larger economic entities get away with, murder and overburden small business. So we need to look at the regulatory burden and make it make sense.
Hi, my name is Ramona Captain and I represent CARP, the New Vision of Aging for Canada. And I'm the president of the chapter in White Rock and Surrey. And I have with me two of my executive directors, April Lewis and Denise Thompson. And we're very pleased to be here today. I was very interested to hear your comment about the lady that you have who is your shadow person, and she has an incredible background, very intelligent, many degrees, great understanding, much like yourself. Why then are we electing so many people who don't have educations, who aren't intelligent? I'm from Ontario originally. How did Ford get in? How in the world are we expecting, I know there are very many conservatives in this riding, and particularly in White Rock. They're going to vote conservative regardless. Scheer is an insurance salesman. He's a career politician. What are his qualifications? And then everybody goes on about, oh, well, Trudeau, he's too young. Scheer's younger. Trudeau's 48, Scheer's 39. And then they go on about, oh, well, Trudeau's just a drama teacher. What's wrong with being a teacher? Isn't that a sign of intelligence? So I would like to hear your views on why so many idiots are being elected instead of intelligent people. How can we change this?
First of all, I'm also a proud member of CARP. I think you guys do great work. So there are a lot of intelligent MPs. I'll stick up for my community, the work community with whom I work day to day. Does have quite a lot of people who have good educations. But the root of the problem is our voting system and the fact of too much control by organized political parties. So when I mentioned earlier that check your brain at the door, you can have a brilliant person become a member of parliament. You're squandering that brain because they, unless they're brave, and by the way, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, very brave, but they're not the norm. The norm is suck it up, vote the way you're told. And on every single vote in Parliament, every single day, I watch as the pages who serve MPs are given by the different party whips. That's a good title, whip. Party whips have the pages hand out on every desk how we are voting today. So I'm the only person I know in Parliament that reads all the bills. And I decide what I'm going to do about them based on what I think is good for public policy for Canada and what I know my community wants. Now, how Ford got elected is really interesting because, of course, that was a very low voter turnout. So I think about half Ontario voters turned out to vote, and of that group, only 40% voted for Ford, so it's very low voter, and they didn't vote for Ford, they voted Conservative. And a lot of them, I talked to people who said, we voted for our MPP, in Ontario MPPs, because we thought they could hold Ford to account because he's such an idiot. And Ford, of course, managed to get in at the last minute when Patrick Brown was ousted. Patrick Brown's progressive conservative platform for Ontario included carbon pricing. Ford got in the only thing you can find that would reflect anything like a fiscal policy was buck of beer.
I was just going to say that. Free beer.
So we get better politicians and better elected people when they stand on their own 2 feet and have to explain their own actions. The more that parties control what MPs do, the worse. And the worst situation is where you can get a false majority. That's Peter Russell's term, Professor Emeritus in Political Science from U of T, Professor Peter Russell, came up with this term, false majority, to describe the situation which we so often get in Canada, which Trudeau has now, which Harper had, which Ford has, which is when the minority of the voters elect a majority government. And that's the minority of the voters in terms of those who showed up to vote. In 2011, when Stephen Harper got a majority government, if we had actually decided who formed government based on the total population of Canadian electors, the majority government would have been run by the We Stayed Home party. Because more people stayed home and didn't vote than turned up to vote for the Conservative Party. But I really do think if people were liberated and Scheer, I'm sorry, I can't bypass Scheer. Scheer got elected, I don't know how many people know this, Scheer was elected for the first time when he was 25. He has been, you talk about a career politician, he's it. Well, Stephen Harper too. At least Justin Trudeau had a job. Neither Stephen Harper nor Andrew Scheer have basically ever had a job that wasn't politics. And I'm very cross with Andrew Scheer because as Speaker of the House, I had to suspend disbelief as a Member of Parliament and believe the Speaker was ruling in the interests of the rights of every MP, because that's the job of a Speaker. And you have to believe that. And Andrew Scheer is the first Speaker to finish his term as Speaker and re-enter partisan politics, and worse, as leader of a political party, and worse, leading his horde in the most disrespectful, anti-parliamentary conduct I've ever seen. He's done damage to the institution he was supposed to respect. So I am cross with him.
Just one more question, if I may. You mentioned Jody Wilson-Raybould, and my question would be, okay, if everybody then can say whatever they wish, it is a good thing, but on the other hand, why is she doing what she's doing? As far as I've seen, the laws were not broken, and she's burning down the house.
Okay, Jody Wilson-Raybould, the laws weren't broken because she held firm.
But they wouldn't have been broken even if she had.
No, it's quite wrong to go back. The constitutional principle of prosecutorial independence really matters. We can't have, speaking back again of our conversation of small business versus big business and who has the sway, we can't be a country where if you're big enough and rich enough, you get a get out of jail free card. We can't be that, and we can't, if a prosecutor, and in this case, the prosecutorial independence is not the Attorney General's. The prosecutorial independence is to protect the independence of the Director of Public Prosecutions, whose name is Kathleen Rizzo. She's the only one, other than the Attorney General, who's looked through the evidence they have on SNC-Lavalin and made a determination under the law, does this corporation qualify for this new tool, deferred prosecution agreement, which I voted for because it looked pretty benign when I read the whole omnibus budget bill in June and looked at this and thought, this is odd, why do we have a change in the criminal code in the omnibus bill? I didn't know it was for SNC-Lavalin. I read the reasons it could be used and thought they were satisfactory. Well, I think they may be satisfactory because the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country looked at the criteria under the deferred prosecution agreement, which included such things as a corporation can qualify if it self-reported its crime. SNC-Lavalin didn't self-report. A negotiation under a DPA could qualify if the acts that this corporation is charged with did not lead to people's deaths. Well, we don't know if the actions of SNC Lavalin in providing $50 million worth of bribes to Gaddafi and family led to anyone's death. But I think the fact that the Director of Public Prosecutions decided not to provide a DPA, we need to look at the evidence before we decide that the Attorney General should do something unprecedented and intervene and tell the Director of Public Prosecutions, you're going to give this company a deal. So the damage that could be done by violating that principle of independence of the prosecutor, which is a constitutional principle. That's the thing about our constitutional principles. You can violate constitutional principles and not break the law. But I think what Jody Wilson-Raybould did was honorable. I bemoan the fact that it's coming out in drips and drabs. Personally, for what it's worth, I think it's quite possible that Justin Trudeau is not to blame for any of this mess, except for the fact that he never got himself a good legal briefing. Neither did Jerry Butts. None of the people in PMO seem to understand the principle of prosecutorial independence, which is shocking. But the person who should make sure they have that information is Michael Warnick. And I think Michael Warnick may well have decided to pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould at the behest of his old boss, who's now chair of the board of SNC Lavalin. Yeah.
Well, the last thing I'll say is when Trudeau is ousted, I only hope, I wish, I hope, I pray you get in and not cheer.
I'm with you there.
Good morning. My name is Madison. I don't represent a company. I'm 18. And so you mentioned voter turnout. And so my question is twofold. One, how do you get young people like myself to vote? And two, how do you get them to vote for you? So I know for myself, I'm undecided. I'll be voting in my first federal election this year. I don't feel that I'll be voting for Scheer. I think that Justin Trudeau would have been a contender, but recently I no longer think so. So I'm, in theory, choosing between yourself and Mr. Singh. So how would you influence voters like myself to vote for you and to vote?
First of all, Madison, I can't tell you how grateful I am that there is a smart 18-year-old in the audience to challenge and ask that question. I think it's fantastic. Let me just go through, I don't want to sound too pedantic, but I want to go back to Westminster parliamentary democracy, because quite often, and our media does this too, we presidentialize elections, and we don't elect a prime minister. So I think it really does matter the strength of the individual candidate in your riding. I think you should talk to them. I think you might want to run yourself, depending on where you live. There should be a direct connection between a member of parliament and their constituents. Now, in my case, what happens is when people imagine this imaginary ballot that's got my name and Justin Trudeau's name and Scheer's name, right away people say, well, she doesn't have any chance. So then you start immediately reducing your options.
I have to be honest, because with our system,
Yeah.
I know in my writing, it's gonna be conservative.
Where do you live?
I live in Langley Aldergrove.
Okay.
So I know it's going to be conservative, so it almost feels as though I need to either choose between liberal or conservative, because it feels like the only person who has a chance of being the conservative candidate is a liberal candidate.
But in that case, especially if you feel as if you're in a riding where the outcome is almost so-called safe ridings for a party, which are disgusting. And this goes back to our first past-the-post voting system, which I was touching on with Ramona. We should have gotten rid of it in Canada, but the Quebec government, by the way, is determined to bring in proportional representation with no referendum, which is interesting. And the PEI government, when they go to the polls on April 23rd, Prince Edward Islanders, I don't know if you've heard this, are at this point likely to elect a Green government with a Green premier, but they're also voting on getting rid of first past the post. So we should be able in a democracy to vote for what we want without fearing we might get the thing we hate the most. But bringing up support for Greens is helpful everywhere. Now, in terms of youth voting, which is more important than how you vote, is getting young people to vote. In 2015, we saw voter turnout go from 60%, in this overall, not just youth, 60% of Canadians voted in 2011. In 2015, 68% voted. That's very impressive, and I believe that the bulk of that growth was young people voting, because there were vote mobs, there were significant efforts by NGOs like, I don't know if you know the group Apathy is Boring, really cool youth-led, youth-run organization working with Elections Canada to try to make sure that that voting stations are on campus, that there are frequent and convenient advance polls at universities, because young people voting matters no matter how you vote. So especially considering there was a big leap in voter turnout in the same election where Harper's previous so-called Fair Elections Act came into play. So we know that hundreds of thousands of people weren't allowed to vote because of falling into one of the areas of required additional documentation, and they couldn't, which is a violation of your constitutional rights if you're not allowed to vote. So that leap in voting from 60% to 68%, I think, is entirely young people. What I worry about is that Justin Trudeau may have poisoned the well, because a lot of young people voted because they believed in him, and they believed the promise that 2015 would be the last election held under first past the post, among other promises, like not approving a pipeline. He never mentioned he would never buy one, but we didn't think that was even something you needed to promise not to do. That was kind of off the charts. I'm hoping that young people will look at all the options in their riding: Liberal, Conservative, People's Party, Green, NDP. Look at the candidates, listen to the candidates, and encourage all of their friends, your friends, to go together to an advance poll. To me, it's much more important that young people vote than that they vote for any particular party. I would be very honored if all young people who can vote in this election vote Green. I will be Prime Minister. So that's something to think about.
Elizabeth, I just wanted to mention also before the next question is a third of Surrey's population is under the age of 19.
Wow.
And it's amazing. I always say when anyone wants to bring business into the city, this is where the human capital is. But absolutely, we need to find a way to get more voters out for elections. Voting is a privilege.
And it's also a duty. The concept of duty has fallen out of favor in a consumer society. We're so busy saying, well, what's my best my best choice, and I'm entitled to get that for me. The notion of civic duty has kind of fallen out of favor as something we have as citizens. So the duty to vote doesn't get mentioned very often. I will say, by the way, the Green Party favors moving voting age to 16, because we think in the context of a high school environment where there can be a conversation about voting, getting young people to vote early is important, and 18 is an odd time because it's the first experience for many young people to be out of their own community. And what I find when I'm canvassing, just street canvassing around universities, is young people will say, oh yeah, but I really, if I'm talking to students at the University of Guelph or University of Victoria, wherever I happen to be, they'll say, but I'm not from here, so I don't really know the issues. Say, well, this is a federal election, and you can vote here, but there's a hurdle there that wouldn't exist if we were starting voting at 16.
Hello, I'm David Pirikive on behalf of the College Student Association that represents over 20,000 students across the Lower Mainland. I'm just wondering, if elected, what's your party going to do to make post-secondary more affordable for students?
We're going to abolish tuition. That's our policy. And we're going to end the practice of student loans that are interest-bearing. And we're going to, anyone who's burdened with a student loan of more than $10,000, we're going to reduce the student loan so it's no more than $10,000, so young people can get a good start in life. And I also think we really need to pay attention to the extraordinarily exorbitant rates that foreign students are paying to subsidize our universities. We need to properly fund post-secondary education as a priority, as an educated, literate populace of people who are capable of critical thinking. Critical thinkers won't get fooled by fake news. Critical thinkers will know. Did you hear that Fox News the other day referred to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala as 3 Mexican countries? Yeah. Fox News referred to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras on air as 3 Mexican countries. You just can't believe it. Canadians would be shocked by that, but I have a horrible feeling, back to the education question, that a lot of the Trump doesn't happen by accident. It started when the US FCC, the US Federal Communications Commission, changed the rules under Ronald Reagan that removed the requirement that news coverage had to be fair and balanced. When the FCC removed those rules, it gave rise to Fox News. At the same time, the US educational system in public education from K to 12 does not produce well-informed, thinking people all the time, depending on where you live. And on top of that, their post-secondary is not as good as ours. So when you look across the board, democracy requires of us that every human being interested in education gets as much education as they want. And a country like Norway can offer free education even to Canadians who go there to get a master's for free. Countries like Ireland can do this. Countries like Germany can do this. We should do it as part of our competitive advantage to have skilled workers where we need them.
Hi, Elizabeth. April Lewis from CARP. I spent the most beautiful Saturday on Main Island with all your constituents. Congratulations, you're going to be 65. You'll get senior discounts. Yay! But I want to know, if elected, will you support CARP's stance? We're trying to eliminate the mandatory withdrawals. What are your thoughts on that, please?
What we decide when we're writing our platform, and I also have a very, very qualified seniors advocate on shadow cabinet, we use CARP's advocacy as how we start planning our platform. Because it's the best. I mean, we do this across the board with civil society because we're looking at the expert groups. In other words, coming back to David's question, coming to terms with the idea of abolishing tuition, I rely on the fact it was terrific research. I mean, whenever the lobby groups come in to see me, I say, send me everything you have. So the Canadian Federation of Students had done deep research to show me that the government of Canada currently squanders about $2 billion a year chasing down student loans and then forgiving them because they're hopelessly out of date and it's never going to happen. We waste money on things. The required withdrawal is not, seniors can make up their own mind when they want to do that, and if you don't, if it's not part of your retirement savings plan, it doesn't make sense.
We're living longer. We're living longer. Before you died at 71, you took your money out and died, but now we're living longer.
My fiance is 71, don't scare me here. We're getting married April 22nd.
You're getting married?
Yeah. So I'm turning 65 in June, I'm not retiring, I'm getting married, and we're gonna have the very best senior strategy in our platform because it's not just for us. I mean, obviously we're seniors, a lot of our candidates are seniors, but we want a society that functions well for every demographic, and we don't want policies that divide us. We need the things that bring us together. And our seniors represent, and thank goodness we're living longer, a brain trust for planning. So we need to have our elders and the voices of our youth, and that's what's going to save us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colin Sanderson with Sanderson Consulting and Movement Development Management. And my question for you is, how does the Green Party see itself moving with Indigenous issues across the land, both urban and rural? And maybe I'll just capture some of that and leave you with a thought as I do sit down. Most recently, I was at one of the Assembly of First Nations. They had their election here. And something that came across the floor from the chief, Grand Chief, was that he encouraged everybody from across the country to vote green in the next election. Okay? So that's every chief that came through from across Canada, Northwest Territories, back to PEI, that showed up here in BC in the last, I think it was just a few months back. Anyway, he encouraged everybody to go green, and he had his reasons and he gave them. But more to the point for yourself that I'd like to understand is, what does the Green Party's platform look like on Indigenous issues? Thank you.
Well, Colin, thank you. I hadn't heard that happen, to imagine that, but that's really very heartening. But our policies around reconciliation start with the recognition that 150 years of colonialism and oppression was bad for the colonializers and the oppressors too. That most of the burden of reconciliation falls on us as settler culture Canadians to actually realize what it would mean to live in a country that had full justice, real reconciliation, and in terms of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, not all the issues are the same, But it starts with saying, the Indian Act is a racist piece of legislation. We shouldn't be living under a racist piece of legislation from 1867 in this country. We should figure out how to get rid of it. We also recognize that this is immensely complicated, but the way to do it, and I have a lot of conversations with our Minister for Indigenous Title. As you know, they split Indigenous issues in half between Indigenous services excuse me, and treaty rights. But I talked to Carolyn Bennett about this a lot, because she'll say, well, no, we can't get rid of the Indian Act because certain First Nations want to keep the Indian Act because they like that way of electing chief and council. So, let's just set a date. I don't care if it's 5 years from now or 7 years from now. So at that date, the Indian Act is repealed. Now, what are we going to do about it? And then First Nations communities can say, we would like to keep that aspect of how we elect chief and council. By the way, I don't know if you know that chief and councils are re-elected every 2 years, required to go through this by the Indian Act. Every Indigenous person who qualifies as an Indian under the Indian Act has to carry a self-identification card. I mean, this is just outrageous in the 21st century. So what we have to do is repeal the Indian Act and have each Indigenous community self-identify. This is the territory we have. This is the governance structure we want. This was recently brought to sharp relief with the arrest of hereditary chiefs in Wet'suwet'en territory. They are legitimate decision makers in the governance structure of Wet'suwet'en First Nation. And the Supreme Court in the Delgamuukw case confirmed that the Wet'suwet'en territory was unceded and confirmed that hereditary chiefs were actually a proper governance instrument. And yet our national media acted as though there were some kind of old hippie Wet'suwet'en people who had no right to be there because elected chief and council are over here. That's a colonial structure, elected chief and council. Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, traditional. So we need to figure out what that looks like and enter into a relationship where it's much more really nation to nation. One of the fringe benefits, of course, is that we can get rid of the billions and billions of dollars that Canadians spend on the bureaucracy that involves oppressing First Nations. That would be a nice saving. First Nations people aren't allowed to start a business on their territory. Can't open a business. Can't get a mortgage. There are a lot of things that obstruct the ability of a First Nations community to start its own business and have economic activity. But right now, most new renewable energy installations in Canada are happening on First Nations land, and no one even talks about it. So I think we need a lot more indigenized culture on the settler culture side, and it won't be easy. I could go on. It won't be easy, but we start with core principles. Canada should not live under racist legislation, and then from there we figure out what replaces it.
Elizabeth, also Surrey has the highest urban Aboriginal population in British Columbia, off reserve. So an absolute opportunity for economic development that we hope you'll advocate for on the Hill. Just a final question that I have for you. The Surrey Board of Trade, we've been advocating, I've been speaking on the Hill and noticed in federal budget 2019 steps towards a national pharmacare program. And one of the pieces that we've been articulating is that we need a universal single-payer pharmacare program because the cost of medicines, whether or not you have an insurance plan, is growing higher. It's a bottom line cost for business. What is your party's perspective on that?
I'm so proud to tell you that we were the first party in Canada to call for universal single-payer pharmacare. The issue has come a long way since I was the first person to call for it as leader of the party. We have such good data. Professor Steve Morgan at UBC and the report on Pharmacare 2020, I think I've lost it. Okay. Yeah, the report on Pharmacare, what? I think you can hear me, all right? Yep. Is that okay for your videoing? I'll just answer this quickly. Pharmacare 2020 is a terrific report that documents exactly how much higher our prescription drug costs are than countries like New Zealand that have single-payer pharmacare. The reason that our drug costs are so high is not, as Big Pharma wants to tell us, because their investment in research is so high they have to recoup it. And that's been debunked by many studies. Mostly they're tweaking around the edges of existing discoveries. They can because we're not. Okay, they can, big pharma can charge whatever it wants. It can make us pay, if you compare the cost of Lipitor in New Zealand with Lipitor in Canada, it's by factors of tenfold more that we pay in Canada than what they pay in New Zealand. The reason pharmacare works to reduce costs is that you can bulk buy. So we need a national agency that bulk buys drugs on a formulary that also goes through another one of my favorite UBC things, which is called the Therapeutics Initiative, that assesses whether drugs are going to kill more people than they help. Right across North America, tens of thousands of people die every year taking prescription drugs as prescribed. Not talking about people who misuse their prescription. So we need to be much more rigorous in not approving certain drugs like Vioxx. British Columbia never bought Vioxx because the Therapeutics Initiative said this will kill, based on the same data set that Health Canada had. Therapeutics Initiative said this drug will kill more people than it helps. Let's not register it. British Columbia saved a lot of money by not buying that drug, but we also saved lives. The whole drug scene for pharmaceuticals needs to be really blown apart. We have an opioid crisis because Big Pharma decided to lie to the medical community and say this drug is less addictive than other painkillers. We really need to identify, speaking of big businesses that are under-regulated, we have to have universal pharmacare with a formulary that rules out the drugs that don't help us, and we have to make sure that it is, and then every province, of course, they deliver healthcare, so they can deliver healthcare using the formulary with the reduced drug prices, because bulk buying drugs will reduce prices, will reduce costs. So, and it's certainly the fastest growing part of healthcare costs that you mentioned in terms of the burden on business. But for our healthcare system, the fastest growing portion of healthcare costs is the cost of prescription drugs. And the only reason that we are the only country in the world with universal healthcare coverage that doesn't include our prescription drugs is because of the lobby of large pharmaceutical companies whose actions are, in my view, often criminal. But I have a certain view of Big Pharma.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our town hall. I know Elizabeth is going to stay longer to respond to any questions in person. For media, we'll have you to the right of the stage for your media scrum. Elizabeth, thank you so much for visiting Surrey. I know we'll see you again, and Surrey is where business happens, and we hope to see you again. Thank you so much.
I'm so honored by the invitation. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Anita.
Thank you so much, everybody.